Games have the power to do more than just entertain. Drew Crecente from Jennifer Ann's group is here now to show us how his organization shines a light on teen dating violence through games.
Hi, I'm Drew Crecente, and I'm the Executive Director of Jennifer Ann's Group, a nonprofit charity focused on the prevention of teen dating violence. Since 2008, we have been producing video games intentionally designed to help teens avoid abusive dating relationships. And so we produce and publish these games in order to further our goals of violence prevention. For us, this is not about making money. For us, this is about saving lives. We use video games because we believe that they are without question the best available approach today for engaging, educating, and empowering young people, especially about sensitive issues like dating and consent. Before I go any further, I should provide further context about our work and our inspiration. Jennifer Ann's Group, like many charities, is named for a person. In this case, it is named for Jennifer Ann Crecente. When she was a senior in high school, she was killed by her ex-boyfriend. It is in her name and in her memory that Jennifer Ann's Group was formed. Jen is my daughter, and she's my only child. As such, my purpose, my identity, was tightly bound to my identification as a parent, and I did not know how to change that. So not knowing how to stop being a dad to Jen, I formed Jennifer Ann's Group. It is an attempt to do some of the good that I know that Jen would have accomplished had she been given the opportunity. I became a dad at a young age, but I feel generally that I was nonetheless an informed dad. I talked with Jen about those uncomfortable topics: drugs, drinking, smoking, sex. And although I talked with her generally about dangerous people, that was usually in the context of dangerous strangers, not the dangers of those who are closest to us. I had no idea that teen dating violence was such a pervasive and dangerous problem. And I'm not alone in that. 81% of parents either are unaware of or otherwise do not believe that teen dating violence is a problem. And so another reason that I formed a charity with Jennifer's name in it was to make people more aware of this very real danger. Jennifer is our brand, and Jennifer Ann's Group is a reminder that this does indeed happen to young people, because it happened to Jen, and she's not a nameless, faceless statistic. Instead, she represents what could be a classmate, a sister, or the babysitter from down the street. Jennifer is one representative tragedy pulled from the millions of statistics. A little more background about intimate partner violence, more commonly known as domestic violence, of which teen dating violence and sexual violence are a subset. I'll try and go through this quickly because I know I'm covering a lot of background information. Teen dating violence, or TDV, is physical, sexual, or psychological abuse, as well as stalking, in an adolescent dating relationship. Essentially, the abuser is generally motivated by an unhealthy need for power or control over the target of their abuse. The distinguishing characteristics of TDV from what is commonly called domestic violence is that it involves young people. And this distinction is important. For one, young people are less likely to have significant dating experience and are therefore less likely to know what constitutes healthy or normal relationships. I will note that TDV is not strictly limited to teenagers. So at Jennifer Ann's Group, we are generally focused on the ages of 11 to 22. Although young women experience the highest rates of dating violence, it is important to note that anybody is at risk of being affected by TDV regardless of their gender, socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, or sexual orientation. Teen dating violence is pervasive. About 1 in 3 high school students in the US have been or will be involved in an abusive relationship. And by the time students have graduated from college, 44% of them will have been in an abusive relationship. And these are the students graduating from college, not the others that some might have you believe are the only ones who are victims to abuse. There's significant impacts from teen dating violence. Affected students are more likely to drop out of school, engage in serious drug or alcohol abuse, or to harm themselves. Approximately 85% of those in abusive relationships as adolescents are then in abusive relationships as adults. Additionally, teens in abusive relationships are 4 to 6 times more likely to become pregnant. And as so many of these teens are in abusive relationships as adults, these impacts extend far beyond the individuals directly affected. The societal impacts of IPV are significant. There's a lifetime economic impact from IPV of over $3.6 trillion. IPV is the second leading cause of workplace homicides. Most mass shootings either involved IPV or the shooter had a history of IPV. And most women homicides are by a current or former intimate partner. I decided that my primary focus was to tackle TDV through increased awareness, through educating students, parents, and educators, and through changing unhealthy attitudes, as well as advocating for laws that help to protect our youth from dating violence. But what I had little understanding of at the time are some of the obstacles to this approach. As I said already, parents are generally unaware, and schools are, this is either an unfunded mandate or it's underfunded. And our culture, unfortunately, has some very unhealthy attitudes regarding dating relationships. Jennifer Ann's group is very small. It began as and it remains a very, very small organization. I run it from my house. I have a staff of primarily me, and so I've always been severely resource constrained. Prior to Jen's murder, I had done a fair amount of IT work, and so the solution that made the most sense to me was to rely very heavily on technology. The weeks after she was killed, I designed our first website, and so in 2007, I created these plastic educational cards. Getting these resources to schools and students, it's been very successful. To date, we've distributed at no cost well over 500,000 of these resources. And although I'm very pleased with this outreach effort, it did not take me very long to realize that the distribution process itself is completely unmanageable for a very small nonprofit. And I love that we've gotten these everywhere. But so much of our budget was spent not only on the cards and the bookmarks, but on shipping. FYI, this is what 100,000 plastic cards looks like in my driveway. And I did not realize that living room floors are not designed to store this much weight. At least my living room was not. And unfortunately, I broke my house a little bit. Issues like this made it very clear that it was impractical for me to continue to try and ship these tangible and very heavy resources. And so I tried to find an intangible or hopefully digital resource, which would not be so expensive to ship and would be much easier to scale up as needed. For a time, my strategy was throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. Poster design contest, t-shirt design contest. And although through each new attempt we did glean some helpful information, which would then inform future attempts, it seemed that directly reaching and directly engaging young people was still very elusive until I considered video games. They seem like an ideal fit. Video games meet our goals of awareness, education, and to some extent advocacy. They also leverage those limited resources available to me, my technology background, and the fact that my brother at the time was the editor of a well-known gaming website. I was also hopeful that this use of video games would increase our media exposure due to the unique prospect of using a medium often identified as being violent to instead prevent future violence. And finally, I believe that video games would directly reach our target demographic of teens as well as their parents and high school educators. But I did not know what that game should look like, and I really did not have the budget to hire a team to create it. And so I decided that what would probably make the most sense was to have a video game design challenge. So the Life Love Game Design Challenge was born with the intriguing question, can you create a video game about teen dating violence without using any violence in the game itself? First place prize that first year, $1,000. I was fortunate to have well-known video game industry judges help to judge the game. This gave those budding game developers an opportunity to have people that they knew and respected give them feedback, some helpful criticism about what would improve their games. But I still didn't know if anybody would actually enter the contest. Fortunately, that first year we received 5 entries after we got a fair bit of media coverage talking about our approach and talking about the contest. And that first year, that first game was, I mean, not only was it playable, but it looked pretty cool also. Since that first year, the contest has modestly continued to grow in popularity. Winning entries have covered many genres, and the majority of the winning games have been from the US, but we've also had games from Thailand, Mexico, Belgium, Canada, India, Ireland, France, Spain, Sweden, Spain, did I say Spain twice? And the UK. We've now published dozens of these small games, and over the years we've been fortunate to receive coverage from a number of media outlets. And so it was very exciting to feel that this media coverage was getting this important information out to the public, because that meant to me that we were increasing awareness and increasing knowledge about teen dating violence. It wasn't until 2010 the game Grace's Diary won the contest. And that's when I realized that there was something more significant that was occurring. The heartwarming response that many of those who had played Grace's Diary had, it made me realize that there was something going on here beyond just merely increasing awareness and knowledge. The players identified with the game's protagonist, and they genuinely cared about what happened to these fictional characters. Some of the comments were very powerful and shared the very real emotions that these players had about this game. This is when I realized that increasing awareness and increasing knowledge are great to an extent, because there are some people who only need to know, who only need to become aware of TDV or to learn how to recognize the warning signs of abuse. But for some people, this won't be enough. Some people might not believe the information we're sharing, or they might disagree with the underlying concepts. They might disagree with the underlying concepts because they might have grown up learning otherwise. If young people do not witness healthy relationship modeling from their parents or older siblings, where do they learn it from? Their peers know as little as they do. And so young people sometimes learn about dating relationships from their culture. And this can be problematic. This still from the movie Say Anything is just one example of what our culture sometimes has to say about acceptable relationship behavior. Here we have an ex-boyfriend who is engaging in creepy and possibly illegal behavior by showing up at his ex's bedroom window and using a boombox to blast the song that was playing when he first slept with her. How is this romance? And this healthy notion of romance, it's not new. Romeo and Juliet with its aspirational treatment of a love that's so strong that it's worth dying for, has presented a very unhealthy view of romantic love for centuries. And so there are many people who have, in one way or another, acquired some very unhealthy attitudes or beliefs about what constitutes healthy relationships. And for these people, merely increasing their awareness of TDV or providing them with some knowledge might not be enough for them. For them, we instead wanted to change those unhealthy attitudes and beliefs. And to do that, we had to consider the ability of these games to persuade. I found some existing studies and basically tried to do things the way that they'd done them. I found some scales that had previously been validated for an association with teen dating violence, set up a Qualtrics account to capture data, an MTurk account to find participants, and got 87 people around the US to participate. The process was straightforward. First, the game players answered some questions. Next, they either played a TDV game or a control game, and then they answered those same questions again. My hope was that those who played a TDV game would show a greater positive change in their answers than those who played the control game. After gathering the data and crunching the numbers, a very kind researcher in the Netherlands went ahead and further crunched the numbers for me and helped write a brief paper about the study. And eventually we were able to present it as a poster at the Games and Learning Alliance conference in Lisbon in 2017, and it was published in the conference proceedings. And it worked. I mean, the games were shown to have had a persuasive impact on those unguided players of the TDV games. Here you can see the pre and post attitudes of those playing a control game. That's the flat line here. And you can see the attitude change of those playing a teen dating violence game. Subsequent study by that same researcher, Dr. Ruud Jacobs, with 262 students in the Netherlands, was published in 2019 in the inaugural issue of the Journal of Games, Self, and Society. And again, the study showed that these games were effective at changing unhealthy beliefs or attitudes regarding traditional relationship and gender norms. Critical aspects of this model are the same as that's part of the social ecological model that's used by the CDC. This graphic is an overview of some of the characteristics of video games that make them effective for learning generally. So up here, generally, experiential learning. For emotional health, the discovery learning is important. You give somebody an opportunity to explore something on their own and recognize those relevant aspects that especially might be important just to them. And then for adolescents, we know that the digital games are the preferred technology, computers are the preferred tools, and importantly, adolescents really appreciated when their wants and desires were taken into consideration. And then what this means is that you have somebody who is much more open to what they are about to experience than if they feel like somebody is imposing something on them. Although these are the only published studies so far using our games, we continue to produce them, and to date we've produced over 50. The prize money has increased over the years, and the first place prize is now up to $10,000. And while all of the games still focus on preventing abuse among adolescents, the themes do change from year to year. In addition to games that are strictly about teen dating violence, we now have also produced games that are about bystander awareness, consent, gaslighting, and healthy relationships. Honeymoon is a game about healthy relationships. We hired an educator to create lesson plans for use in the classroom and have pilot tested this game along with the lesson plans in the El Paso Independent School District. And the response has just been great. Those counselors and those educators who used the lesson plans in conjunction with the game had really wonderful things to say about that experience. One topic that we've focused on recently is consent. Consent is not well understood by many teens, and unfortunately, it's not well understood by many adults either, even though consent impacts us on a regular basis. For example, when the police ask to search your car, it is your consent that they are requesting. And similarly, if you're making the decision to have elective surgery, it is your informed consent that the doctor must have prior to that surgery. And prior to kissing somebody in whom we have a romantic interest, it is their consent that we must receive in advance. Consent has been in the news a lot lately, but there has not been enough information about its meaning or its importance. So to address this, we have published several games about consent, and these games will help people, young and old alike, understand what consent is and why consent matters. I'm going to show you what consent is, but first, here is a legal definition of consent. Consent is a concurrence of wills, an act of reason accompanied with deliberation, the mind weighing as in a balance the good or evil on each side. Like many legal terms of art, consent can be difficult to understand at first glance, and it will help to break it down into its elements. Consent involves giving and getting permission. This permission is informed, freely given, actively given, and revocable. I will illustrate these elements by taking you through some of our consent games. Informed. This requires that the person giving permission understands what that permission entails. For example, a person must be beyond a certain age to legally engage in sexual activity, because while they are too young, they are unable to fully appreciate its consequences. The game Crossing Boundaries follows the adventures of 3 students traveling around the world, and they brought a game along with them called Snog a Frog. This game involves kissing frogs, but you must, of course, first ask their permission, because even frogs deserve consent. Here, this frog is underage and therefore cannot give consent because they are too young to be fully informed.
I wasn't granted, I consented.
Freely given. This requires that the person giving permission does so free of coercion, intimidation, force, or threat. For example, an employee is not freely giving permission for their work supervisor to kiss them if they are only doing so out of fear that they would otherwise lose their job. The game Stuck in a Dark Place covers many consent scenarios through its 8 chapters. In this scene, we see that an employee is being harassed by her boss. If somebody gives permission only out of fear that they would lose their job, that is not consensual, because that permission is not freely given. Actively given. This requires that the person giving permission actively gave that permission. For example, an unconscious person cannot actively consent, nor can a person who is too drunk or otherwise incapacitated. The game How to Blorble Blobble teaches consent by teaching the player a series of dance moves. And here, the player wants to dance, but their partner is intoxicated and therefore unable to actively give permission. Revocable. This requires that the person giving permission can revoke that permission whenever they want. For example, if a person engaged in any number of consensual activities last year, that does not mean that permission still exists when you see them this year at the mall. The game Adrift approaches consent in a very unique way. The game takes place in space, and all interactions are between a member of a space salvage crew controlled by the player and the AI in charge of an abandoned spaceship. Here, the player is reminded that although it was okay to press a ship's button previously, that does not mean that it's okay to always press that button. You must get permission every single time you want to press that button. A reminder that permission is revocable and therefore must be granted every single time. How to blurble blobble is appropriate for middle school and up. Although it does teach consent using the metaphor of dancing, at the end of the game, it does point out that the consent lessons apply to sex as well. Adrift, appropriate for all ages. This game relies completely on metaphor and never even discusses sex. Crossing boundaries, appropriate for high school and up. This game does include some scenarios of non-consensual sex, but in a very safe way. Stuck in a dark place. This game is appropriate for older students, and we suggest that parents or educators play the game before having their teens play. In addition, this game does have a content warning setting, which allows the player to skip some of the descriptions and off-screen depictions of sexual assault. One of our consent games, Adrift, was recently in a museum exhibition in Australia. The MOD Museum had an exhibition entitled Hedonism, and a life-size version of the game Adrift was created for museum visitors. Participants could interact with the objects, and by properly following the game's rules, they would learn about the fundamental principles of consent. And last year, we were honored to be contacted by Games for Change and notified that one of our games about consent, called Respect Danis, or the Respect Dance, was an official nominee for Most Significant Impact. Respect Danis was created in collaboration with World Vision Vanuatu in order to create a culturally relevant game for young people living on Vanuatu. And although we did not win, I am honored to say that we lost to UNICEF. Respect Danis is written in Bislama. It has a Bislama narrator, and the characters, the settings, and the scenarios are all culturally relevant, created in conjunction with people living and working on Vanuatu. It is still amazing to me to see young people on the other side of the world learning about consent and healthy relationships on this game that has Jennifer's name on it. To date, we have produced more than 50 of these small but impactful games about important issues. All of the games are in English. We have a few in Spanish, one in French, one in Bislama, but importantly, all of them are 100% free. There are no ads in the games. There are no privacy issues. There's no data collection, because we're trying as much as possible to remove any barriers from young people picking up these games and learning about these important issues on their own, from educators using these games in the classroom, and from parents who want to find a way that they can engage a young person in their life about these really important issues. And so in conclusion, TDV, or teen dating violence, is a serious issue. It is more prevalent and is more dangerous than commonly known. Our roadmap for prevention focuses on awareness, education, attitudes, but it's difficult to overcome these obstacles because parents generally don't have much awareness that teen dating violence is an issue. Schools generally don't have the funds to hire experts and teach this in the classroom. And our culture, unfortunately, presents a lot of these issues in a really unhealthy light and presents very unhealthy behavior as being acceptable or even commendable. But we're finding more and more that these serious pro-social games We know they're engaging. We know they're powerful. We also know that they are appropriate for young people. Young people prefer this approach. And when we're talking about sensitive issues like healthy relationships and consent, we know that the need for a self-paced program like these games is much more appropriate. Research validates much of what we were expecting to find. It's ongoing, and we're continuing to seek other researchers and additional funding so that we can refine these games and make them even more helpful. Latest news is very encouraging. It's wonderful that there's been more recognition of the way that these types of games can be used to engage people about very serious issues, especially those issues that are sensitive. So again, my name is Drew Crecente. I'm the founder and executive director of Jennifer Ann's Group. And on my behalf and on behalf of Jen, I thank you very much for your time and for your attention to these important issues. Thank you.